In the ancient world, punishment was a public spectacle. It was raw, brutal, and visible to all. If you broke the Sabbath, cursed your parents, or committed adultery, the penalty under Old Testament law could be death by stoning. It was a brutal, swift, and final judgment. Today, we tell ourselves we've moved past such barbarism. Our justice is civilized, handled behind closed doors, far from public view. But what if that's the problem? What if, behind those walls, a new kind of horror has been allowed to fester, one that trades a quick death for a slow, indefinite one? We're about to explore two vastly different worlds of confinement, the pit prisons of the ancient Bible, and the sprawling detention network of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE. By the end of 2025, the number of people in ICE detention has exploded to a record high, with data showing more than 68,400 people in custody as of mid-December. This video gets into a critical question. Have our methods of confinement truly evolved for the better, or have they just taken on a new, hidden, and maybe even more insidious form? We'll look at what these systems were designed for, the brutal reality of their conditions, and the human cost of being trapped inside. To understand any system of punishment, you first have to ask, what's it for? In the world of the Old Testament, the answer is surprisingly not long-term incarceration. The law of Moses is filled with prescribed punishments, but warehousing people for years at public expense isn't one of them. For most crimes, justice was meant to be finite, resolved through restitution, corporal punishment, or execution. Stoning, burning, and death by the sword were all on the table for various offenses, designed to preserve community holiness and social order. Imprisonment as we know it wasn't really a standard Hebrew punishment. Instead, it mostly shows up in the Bible under foreign, pagan systems, like in Egypt. The story of Joseph gives us the most detailed peek. After a false accusation, Joseph is thrown into the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But even here, the goal wasn't a 10-year sentence. Historically, prisons in ancient Egypt and the Near East were often used as holding areas for suspects before a trial or judgment, not for serving out long-term punishments. Joseph was essentially cast into a pit and forgotten, held indefinitely with no clear way out. Now, let's jump to today. On paper, ICE detention has a similar, non-punitive purpose. It's classified as administrative detention, not criminal punishment. The stated goal is to hold people while they wait for their immigration proceedings or for removal from the country. But a look at the data reveals a disturbing reality. As of late 2025, a staggering 73.6% of all detainees have no criminal conviction at all. Many are asylum seekers, long-term residents, or people picked up for minor offenses like traffic violations. With massive backlogs causing people to be held for months, sometimes even years, this administrative holding starts to look and feel a lot like de facto punishment, an indefinite sentence for a non-criminal issue. So, what was it actually like to be a prisoner in Joseph's time? The Bible uses the word dungeon, or pit, evoking the dark, isolated cistern his own brothers threw him into. These weren't cell blocks with steel bars. They were often literal dugout holes or fortified areas where the environment itself was part of the confinement. There wasn't systematic torture in Joseph's story, but the despair of isolation, of being thrown away and forgotten, was its own form of punishment. Ironically, because he found favor, Joseph was eventually put in charge of other prisoners, a strange promotion within his own confinement that shows just how arbitrary a prisoner's treatment could be. Today's ICE facilities are worlds away technologically, yet echoes of these ancient horrors are still here, just amplified on an industrial scale. The isolation of the pit has been replaced by two modern extremes: maddening overcrowding and torturous solitary confinement. By the fall of 2025, the detainee population had surged nearly 70% in just a few months, forcing the system to operate at 140% of its funded capacity and pushing it to a breaking point. Reports describe people sleeping pressed together on bare floors and going weeks without access to showers. On the other end of the spectrum is the pit of the modern age, solitary confinement. A report from Physicians for Human Rights found that between April 2024 and May 2025, ICE placed over 10,500 people in solitary. The United Nations defines solitary confinement that lasts longer than 15 days as a form of torture, yet one analysis found that in some regions, nearly 3/4 of solitary placements met or exceeded that time frame, with the average isolation lasting about a month. This isn't just for those deemed a security threat. The use of solitary for vulnerable people, those with medical conditions or at risk of assault, has also soared, with their time in isolation increasing dramatically. 13 years. From the age of 17 to 30, Joseph lost 13 years of his life to slavery and imprisonment for a crime he didn't commit. The human cost was a stolen youth. Remarkably, the man whose wife accused Joseph chose to imprison him rather than execute him, which might suggest even he had his doubts but felt pressured to act. Justice took a backseat to power. Joseph's eventual rise to second in command of Egypt is a miraculous story of vindication, but it doesn't erase the years he spent in that pit, forgotten by the world. Today, the human cost in ICE detention is measured in bodies, minds, and torn-apart families. A U.S. Senate investigation in late 2025 uncovered more than 80 credible reports of medical neglect across the detention system. Detainees were denied insulin, left without care for days while suffering chest pains, and forced to compete for clean water. One report from August 2025 described clinicians and advocates protesting what they called systemic medical neglect that was turning immigration hearings into a death sentence. By the end of 2025, at least 30 people had died in ICE custody, the highest number since 2004. This is a system where, according to recent data, 7 out of 10 people detained have no criminal record. Their only crime is their immigration status. The justification for their confinement is civil, not criminal. Yet they face conditions that are arguably worse than many high-security prisons, all while being held indefinitely. The cost isn't just measured in deaths, but in the lasting trauma of family separation, the psychological damage of prolonged isolation, and the despair of being lost in a bureaucratic maze with no end in sight. The punishments of the ancient world were, without a doubt, brutal. They were swift, public, and violent, but they were also finite. Today, we've replaced the spectacle of the stoning with the silent, unseen machinery of mass detention. We've traded the swiftness of the sword for the slow, crushing weight of indefinite confinement. Our investigation started with a question: have we truly progressed? In many ways, the answer is a resounding no. The pit of Joseph's time, a place of isolation for forgotten souls, has been recreated on a massive scale. We've built a sprawling network of modern dungeons, filled not with society's most dangerous, but with people navigating a complex civil process. We have created a system where the punishment is the process itself, a hidden horror that unfolds far from the public eye. The methods have changed, but the fundamental injustice of being confined, forgotten, and stripped of one's humanity without due cause remains chillingly familiar. The question we have to ask ourselves now is not whether their punishments were barbaric, but whether ours are truly any more civilized. What are your thoughts on this comparison? Does modern administrative detention carry its own form of cruelty? Share your perspective in the comments below. And if you believe these hidden stories need to be brought to light, subscribe for more investigations into the challenging questions of our time.